Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric and a continuing series on the Steam Deck. More importantly, what emulators you should be getting set up and what games you should be playing when you do so. And I get a lot of questions about MAME, specifically the 3D side of it, because it's some of my favorite stuff of all time, that 90s 3D jank. So today I'm going to be giving you a list of the games I think you should be playing on MAME on your Steam Deck as far as 3D is concerned. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But there is so much fun to be had on the MAME side of things with 3D. Now it is definitely not as fleshed out as the 2D side, and I will be doing a video on the best 2D games I think you should play as well. But trust me, there's a ton to play on the 3D side. MAME is incredible because not everyone is stupid enough like I am to collect the original arcade boards to do stuff like this. It's a ton of fun if you want to get into it, but for the most part, probably just stick to MAME. But right off the top, I have so many different picks for this, but Dirt Dash from Namco is one of my absolute favorites because this was not a huge success in arcades compared to something like Ridge Racer, which is an absolute bummer because I think this game is every bit as good as Ridge Racer, even if it's more of an off-road arcade racing game. If Sega had Sega Rally to Daytona USA, then Namco had this game against Ridge Racer, and it is an absolute blast to play on Steam Deck. And if you need any help getting it set up, look at the description below because I do have that MAME tutorial there as well. But this is everything I want in an arcade racing game that's never been ported to any home console, so it's either an original arcade board or MAME, and it plays incredibly well on Steam Deck. It looks great on the screen. You can adjust the analog control sensitivity, you pick it up, you play it, you get good at it, and it's an absolute blast, especially if you're on the go. Play for 10 minutes on the train, and that's all you really need. Because as much as you're racing against the different cars on the track for that position, you're really racing against the clock, and I love the diversity of this game. You have so many different surfaces to drive on, dirt, snow, tarmac, and it's not like you're going through different courses. It is just one incredibly large track with different environments, and your entire goal is to go from the start to the finish. If you race well, you're going to be done with it in like 5 minutes and you can move on to the next game, but it's going to take a ton of practice because to get a handle on the handling, fun very much intended, it's going to take some practice because every single surface is going to control slightly differently and you need to be quick on your controls to understand that. Tarmac's going to be different than snow, that's going to be different than gravel, that's going to be different than sand, but once you understand what the game's asking of you, this looks, plays, and sounds incredible. It's one of those games that I feel like not a lot of people know about, so definitely throw Dirt Dash on your Steam Deck and play it today. I think you're going to absolutely love it. Now, of course, we can't talk about MAME in arcades without talking about fighting games, and Street Fighter EX2 Plus is an absolute spectacular fighting game that doesn't get near as much mention compared to the 2D Street Fighter entry, something like Street Fighter Alpha or 3. And I absolutely love this game, not just because it's in 3D, but because it has a lot of characters that aren't in the mainline Street Fighter roster. Now, I'm not saying this game is as good as something like Street Fighter 3 or even Alpha 2 or 3, but it has its own place and it is an absolute blast. And compared to the PlayStation 1 versions, because this runs on PlayStation 1 based arcade hardware, it is going to be more visually impressive. Now, this is the type of thing that's perfect on Steam Deck. You're just traveling around, you're on the train, you're on a plane, and you want to get a couple of rounds in, you can 100% play this, but then you take it home, you dock it, have some friends over for a fight night, give them a second controller, and you guys are playing an absolutely incredible entry in the Street Fighter franchise that is best played via the arcade original, and in this instance, MAME. I just love everything that Arika did with the EX franchise, and it's a fun and fresh pivot from the 2D Street Fighter we all know and love. And it's one of those things I feel like not as many people have played the EX series of games as they have the mainline Street Fighter entries, and that is just a bummer because this is an absolute blast. But that's the great thing about the Steam Deck. You can pop this game on, you can give it a try, and you can see whether or not you enjoy it, because I'm pretty sure you are going to. But leave me a comment down below and tell me if you've ever played the EX games and which one is your favorite or what you think about the series in general. Because there's not as much love out there for EX as there is for the mainline games, but I know some people absolutely do love them, and I'm sure a few of you are here. And you even get amazing bonus rounds, except you're not beating up a car, you are punching a satellite as it falls to Earth, and you need to do enough damage to it before your timer is up. Classic Street Fighter, love it, definitely give it a shot. Now for a completely different pivot, we're going to be talking about Chaos Heat from Taito, and this runs on the Taito GNet board. This is PlayStation 1 based hardware. Again, it's another game that never got a home port, but it is one of my favorite arcade exclusive 3D games of all time from the 90s. It basically plays a little bit like Zombie Revenge from Sega, except earlier, and it has that pseudo survival horror run and gun aspect to it. Definitely way more of an action game than survival horror, but any game that gives you a giant cockroach and zombies that you need to fight is 100% going to be something that has my heart. And I absolutely love the bosses in this game as well. They're gigantic, they're well detailed. This game is a total vibe, and it's like 40 minutes long, and because you can bring a second player, this is the type of thing, just pop it in a dock, get a second controller, and start playing. And this is a game that you're never going to see in arcades in North America. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 instances of it known to exist here, but it's the type of thing with MAME you can play right now, and the soundtrack is spectacular. Go ahead and listen for like 35-40 seconds, and I'll be right back.
You get far. You get the AC.
Absolutely spectacular soundtrack to an absolutely spectacular game, and this is the type of thing they don't make much of anymore. But if you're looking for an awesome run and gun on your Steam Deck and you want to play some retro games, you could do a lot worse than Chaos Heat. Now there is a sequel on the PlayStation 1, but for my money the original's the better of the two, and there's only 2 ways to play this game: an original arcade board or emulating it via MAME. And because you got the Steam Deck in your hand and watching this video, you know which one I recommend. Now moving on to my favorite arcade genre of all time, light gun games. If you watch the channel you know I love them, and if you don't, now you do. Crypt Killer is one of my absolute favorites. Konami basically made a cheesy B-movie style arcade game here in the horror light gun genre, and it kind of feels like Ray Harryhausen and those old monster movies from the 50s and 60s. It's not a pretty game, but that is by intent, but it's got so many different vibes going on here. Like this Egyptian mask that's just bleeding from the eyes. All of the bosses are weird and nonsensical and fantastic in all of the best ways possible. You have an Egyptian woman here with the body of a sphinx, angel wings, and that headdress on. It is just always going hard, and it's the type of game with the trackpads on the Steam Deck. Dealing with mouse controls can be very easy, but you can also use something like Ascendant on your Steam Deck if you want to go docked. Pretty much everything can work, and that's what I love about the Steam Deck. Whatever you can dream up as far as controls and gameplay are concerned, you can 100% execute. But this is the type of game, if you've never seen it before, it is worth the 35 to 40 minutes to play it. The graphics are janky and pixelated in all the best ways possible from that era, and it's one of those things: play it on the go, dock it, play it with a controller, play it with a light gun, play it however you want, but definitely check it out. And it's just such an interesting look. All of these 2D sprites here, those zombies just tearing pieces of their flesh and throwing it at you. It is meant to look janky, and it achieves every single thing. And there are multiple endings to the game as well, so you can definitely get some replayability out of it. And like pretty much every arcade game, it is designed for 2 players. So basically every game on this list is something you can bring over to a game night and enjoy with your friends. But I am curious who has played this game before. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you knew about it, if you played it, and what you think. And I'm also curious if you're going to play it after I give you this recommendation, because there's a lot of different light gun games you could play on MAME, and maybe I'll leave a couple in the description below, but for my money, this is my absolute favorite. But we should move on to my second absolute favorite, and that's going to be Golgo 13. Not an easy name to pronounce, but an absolutely spectacular arcade light gun game that has a completely different feel than something like Crypt Killer. If you've ever played Point Blank from Namco, you will kind of understand what's going on here, but unlike Point Blank that has that big sense of humor, Golgo 13 is basically just a puzzle light gun game. Every stage is going to present a different challenge, and you usually only have 1 to 2 bullets to achieve that. But it is so much fun learning what's going on within this game and trying to understand. Like this stage right here, you just need to snipe somebody flying in a private jet, and you get 1 shot to do so. Now this is a game that's going to be better if you hook up something like Ascendant, but it's absolutely great for mouse controls as well, because even if you have that extra control, it can still be difficult in some stages, because the characters are going to be moving around. Like this one right here, you need to shoot that general in the head, and you do get bonuses for different areas you shoot him. This isn't just a challenge from a puzzle perspective, but it's also a score attack with a great soundtrack. Listen, I'll be right back. I just love that soundtrack, but be aware that there are 3 Golgo 13 games that work in MAME. This is Kaseki no Dandu, the 2 of the 3, and they do share some stages, but you can pretty much pick whatever one you want. You're going to have a fun time. But I love the challenge in this game. This entire stage just wants you to shoot her high heel out, and you will see I was so close, 843 out of 1,000. But if we move on to the next stage, sometimes you're not even trying to hurt anybody. We just need to shoot the strings of this violin while the performer is using it on stage. You'll see here I take that shot, and I am so incredibly close to getting it absolutely perfect. You get these little intercut stories, then you get the scoring screen, and you'll see I got 973 out of 1,000, but damn it, I want those other 27 points. Now, it wouldn't be my channel if we didn't talk about 3D arcade racing games, and there's a ton to pick here, but the one that I'm going to recommend outside of something like Dirt Dash is going to be California Speed. Now, while this is on the Nintendo 64, the arcade version is fundamentally so much better, and it works absolutely perfect on the Steam Deck. And again, this is one of these games that is perfect for your morning commute. If you're on the train, you're sitting on the bus, just take your Steam Deck out, open up California Speed, play a few courses, and before you realize it, you're going to be at work, and you're going to notice that you don't actually want to work, you just want to keep playing video games. But this is just one of those arcade racing games that's larger than life. We're driving through a mall, we're running over patrons, there's so many different shortcuts. And this is basically like the pseudo-sequel to something like San Francisco Rush, and it is just fundamentally better as the arcade version, because while the Nintendo 64 version is a good game, this is just better in all respects, and it is the version you should be playing. And this is one that I don't see as much at arcades anymore. I still see San Francisco Rush cabinets from time to time, and definitely some Ridge Racers, but it seems like California Speed was not as successful as those other games, so it is not one that you're going to see all that often. But this is just an absolute blast of a racing game. There's so many different courses, so many different shortcuts, and learning the best line through the course is where a lot of the fun is going to come from on this. And I just love this era of 3D as well. It's not as janky as some of the PlayStation 1 based stuff, but it still has those blurry textures and those big chunky polygons that if you grew up with them in the 90s, you're absolutely going to know and love. But take my word for it, if you're looking for a fun 3D arcade racing game to play on your Steam Deck via MAME, you could do a lot worse than California Speed. Again, just running through something like an indoor shopping mall, running people over, and trying to get that first place finish is absolutely a blast. I got second place here, and I should have been able to get first. But speaking of 3D arcade racing games that are better in the arcades than they were on home consoles, we're going to go with Cruisin' World here. Now, I could have gone with Exotica, but World is my favorite of the games, and it is just so much better as the arcade version. Because while the Nintendo 64 is no slouch, it definitely does not run at high of a frame rate. You definitely have a lot of that fog and obscuring artifacting going on compared to the arcade original. Now, this is definitely one of those games you either are going to love it or hate it, because the physics, the driving style are very unique to the Cruisin' franchise. I love it, and every time I see a Cruisin' arcade cabinet in the wild, I definitely throw a couple of quarters in just to have some fun. But it's another game that just perfectly pivots over to this Steam Deck. The analog controls, the analog triggers for your steering, gas, and brake, it just works, and it looks so good as well. And that's the thing, the Steam Deck isn't just great as a handheld gaming PC where you can play modern releases on it. I barely do that whatsoever. I'm just kind of running around playing different arcade games and consoles from the back in the day on my Steam Deck. I was just on a flight a few weeks ago, and I was playing Cruisin' World after I captured this footage, and for like 45 minutes on the plane just had an absolute blast. Because that's the great thing about emulation, especially on the Steam Deck. A lot of these arcade games are designed for 10 to 15 minutes worth of play and you moved on. And that's what handheld gaming is to me as well. It's a shorter burst way to play video games when I only have 15-20 minutes. So take my word for it, if you only have 15 minutes, you want to play another arcade racing game that you're going to absolutely love, throw Cruisin' World on your Steam Deck, and you get women in bikinis giving you trophies. But moving on to a shmup in 3D, we're going to be talking about Solar Assault from Konami. This is basically a 3D Gradius game, and it's one of the rare arcade boards that Konami has. And just recently it started to finally 100% work in MAME. For the longest time, this game would freeze on the 3rd or 4th stage, but with improvements in MAME, and I love when that happens, you can 100% play this game from start to finish. And this runs on a lot of custom Konami 3D hardware, and I do love all the custom 3D hardware from this era. It is better than we got in home consoles, but not as good as stuff that we'd see when the Dreamcast came out. And this era of 3D kind of only ever existed on PC and in arcades. But this is the type of game you can play it within 25 minutes, but to actually get good at it is going to take hours upon hours. It's visually stunning, it's got a great gameplay hook, and it's got one of my favorite soundtracks of any Konami arcade game of all time. So go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds, I'll come back and I'll show you more games I think you should play. It's just such a good soundtrack. It is one of my favorites. But again, when you're just wandering around with your Steam Deck, just throw this game on. Because I'm assuming you probably didn't see this in arcades back in the day, but leave me a comment and tell me if you did. Because in the US, this was a very rare cabinet and the game did not do well whatsoever. Now I will say it does take a little bit of getting used to understand your screen space orientation in this. And sometimes you might take a cheap death where you feel like you didn't hit that bullet or the bullet didn't hit you, but you've blown up anyway. It just takes a little bit of time to pivot your brain to understand how a shmup in full 3D like this works, but when you get a hold of it, you're absolutely going to love it both visually and mechanically. Trust me, I'll give you your money back if you don't like it, and since this is free, I owe you nothing. Moving on to a game that is 100% basically extinct in arcades but works great via MAME emulation is going to be Prop Cycle. Back in the 90s, arcade cabinets were trying to do different things that home consoles could do, and that wasn't just to have better 3D hardware, it was to have experiences you couldn't have at home. Now while you can't hook your Steam Deck up to a bicycle, or I guess you could if you were a good modder, maybe one day I will do it, you can still experience this and it is still a ton of fun. It is just such a weird game and MAME keeps things like this alive. The entire hook in arcades is you're supposed to pedal faster to move faster in the game, and you could use brakes to slow down, and you had handlebars to move your prop cycle around. Now obviously on MAME we just use analog sticks and analog triggers, and that works perfectly fine. But this is basically just a time attack racing game where you fly around the sky trying to pop balloons to hit a certain scoring threshold before you run out of time. But these are all open worlds, there's multiple paths to take throughout them, and learning and discovering what's going on is so much of the fun of Prop Cycle. And it's just one of those things, you open it up on your Steam Deck and suddenly you have a smile on your face. Maybe it's something you've never played before, and it is a look back into where arcades came from, and that is why this game is on the list. It might not be the best arcade game of all time, but it is such a fun experience to play this on your Steam Deck in 3D. So if you're looking for something you've maybe never heard of before, a unique experience that you're never going to have again, open up Prop Cycle on your Steam Deck and give it a play. I would be very, very surprised if you didn't enjoy it. It also runs on custom Namco 3D hardware, and a lot of fun is just looking at what consoles could have been at home if this hardware had transitioned to being a home console. Now, it's not going to be a video game esoterica video talking about arcade games if I don't fit San Francisco Rush in here somewhere, and you're going to see a pattern where a lot of the genres I'm recommending are very similar, and that is because stuff like light gun games and especially 3D racing games were so huge in the 90s. And this is probably my favorite 3D arcade racing game ever made that doesn't have the Sega name on it. The first time I played San Francisco Rush in arcades, I fell in love with it, and I've been playing it ever since. I do have an original board for this in my collection, but it is so cumbersome to set up with all of the different pedals and wheels. Honestly, if I just want to do a pick up and play experience, I use MAME, and now with my Steam Deck I just throw it in the dock, launch the game with a controller, and I am playing immediately. And that's so much of what the Steam Deck is great at. It removes the barrier between you and the gameplay. You might be the type of person that collects arcade boards, and if you are, you'll realize that unless you have a cabinet with this sitting ready to use, 9 times out of 10 it's just so much easier to emulate something so you can enjoy it for 45 minutes and move on. And this runs great on MAME as well. All the games I'm showing you I've tested on MAME, and they were all running at full speed, and they didn't have any crashes whatsoever. It used to be that 3D and MAME was a little bit flaky, but in the last couple of years, so many things have improved to the point where I can recommend all these games to you and they will just work unless you drive into a wall. But this game, again, absolute banger of a soundtrack. Go ahead and listen for 30 seconds and I'll be right back one more time. maybe the most 90s soundtrack ever to exist, and San Francisco Rush is the most 90s game to ever exist. And just so you know, I'm playing Alcatraz Edition here, which was a ROM upgrade to the original cabinet, giving it more tracks and features. But when this game came out in the 90s, it was a hit. If you've never played it, 100% play it. If you played it 100 times, make it your 101st time. There's so many different shortcuts, so many different tracks, and the physics and handling system are so unique in this game. I guarantee you this is one of the best racing games of all time, and you need to play it. Now, I've given you a 3D shmup in Solar Assault. Now I'm going to give you a traditional shmup in G Darius, and we're playing version 2 here. If you're not great at shmups, do not play version 2 until you play the original G Darius, because version 2 wants your quarters. It's going to take you into the back alley. It is going to mug you, leave you for dead, and steal your wallet while it's doing it. Except in this instance, you're still going to be having fun when that happens. This was a ROM upgrade to the original game for people that had already mastered the first game. This is one of the hardest shmups of all time I've ever played in the non-bullet hell genre, but it's also one of the most intriguing, visually interesting, and mechanically interesting shmups around, because you get this entire capture mechanic where you can capture different ships that you're fighting against and use them in your own battle. But this just looks so good on the Steam Deck, because a lot of this janky 3D from the 90s looks better on a smaller screen than it does when you blow it up to a large television. But the great thing about MAME on the Steam Deck with the scaling built in is that you get a really clean image out when you're docked, and it's going to look great there as well. But this is just one of those games. It is an absolute iconic arcade release, and it did come out on the PlayStation 1, but version 2 never did. Only recently did version 2 end up on PCs as a release, but I still think the arcade original is the best way to play. And this is the type of thing, with save states, you can practice and get better at the game. You can take it with you, you can play it on your lunch break, or you can sit on your couch at home with a controller in your hand. But honestly, with this one, I recommend using an arcade stick. But this game is just so visually interesting. The soundtrack is spectacular. It is hard as nails. It's got everything I want in an arcade game, and it does just work perfectly on the Steam Deck. And that's a lot of why I do these recommendation videos, to try to get you to play things maybe you've never played before, and I pick games that do work so you won't have any issues with them whatsoever. But this is just such a visual trippy game towards the later end as well. If you've never played it before, I can guarantee you're never going to forget your first playthrough, so give G Darius version 2 a try, and if you're not very good at shmups, play the original version. And one more light gun game on the way out, Carnival. This one's definitely not my favorite of all time. I think it is a good B tier effort, but the only way to play it is original arcade hardware or via MAME emulation, and again, it's a game that works great on the trackpad. It's so good that the Steam Deck has the trackpad on there for stuff like light gun games. You basically just treat it as a mouse cursor, but like I said earlier in the video, if you've got a Sendin or other sort of PC light gun that can pivot to be a mouse, then you can dock this and play it at home. And all of the stages are so weird. I'm just showing you the Christmas stage right here, because you do get to fight Krampus at the end, but this game is just so indicative of why MAME is great. And this was a minor hit in the 90s. You're not going to see it very often whatsoever anymore, but it is one of those games that if you're getting into MAME emulation, if you're looking for new things to play in 3D on MAME, you cannot pass Carnival up. I remember when I first saw this game, I loved it, and in intervening years, I've decided I like it a little bit less, but it's still a ton of fun, and it's a game that I think you should check out on your Steam Deck. But leave me a comment down below and tell me what game you think I forgot, because this is the end of the list, and if Santa didn't bring you that Christmas gift you wanted back in the day, you can shoot him over it right now. Sure, that I'll have another Steam Deck video next week, and I'll have videos throughout the week, but we are done. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.